Jewish people went to sleep and we needed to be woken up, which isn't what you'd expect on such an exciting day. And therefore, to rectify that initial blur, we stay up all night in anticipation of receiving the Torah this year. And finally, we read the book of Ruth, the story of a princess from the land of Moab who marries into a prominent Jewish family that fled the land of Israel because of a famine. When Ruth's mother-in-law suffered, and her two sons, one of them being Ruth's husband, she decides to return to the land of Israel and tries to convince Ruth to remain behind on returning with her mother-in-law despite tremendous hardship and poverty. She becomes the ideal convert with her famous declaration, "Your people are my people and your God is my God." Arrives in the land of Israel. She ends up having a child from a man named Boaz, and she ends up becoming the great-grandmother of none other than King David. And Shavuot happens to be the anniversary of the passing of King David. Her life underscores the fact that anybody who's committed to being part of the Jewish people is welcome, and that they can end up making an invaluable contribution to the destiny of the Jewish people. Before we conclude the crash course, let's focus on the one key ingredient that was responsible for helping us achieve this incredible milestone of becoming God's people: Jewish unity. Tradition teaches that the Jewish people stood at the foot of Mount Sinai as one man with one heart. Jewish unity took us to our greatest heights, and it became the most powerful moralizing force in the history of all mankind. So this Shavuot, let's see beyond our differences and help each other live up to our full potential. Let's learn more Torah, let's do more mitzvot, and truly be a light.
Okay.
Into the nations. Chag Sameach.
Shoot.
Oh, okay. So, our first presenter is Cheryl Levine. Cheryl comes from many generations of New Sachari B'nai Zion members. I love listening to her dad, Erwin Rosen, talk about his days as a bar mitzvah boy with Rabbi Rifkin. But Cheryl has earned her own stripes. For years, her name was simply Mora Cheryl, and her name has been synonymous with educational programming, Jewish educational programming, particularly with kids in a number of venues, both here and in the Mirowitz Legacy School, Solomon Schechter. Cheryl's a licensed clinical social worker working mostly, but not exclusively, with people experiencing trauma. It's our special treat that Mora Cheryl is making a return engagement, this time for adults, sharing some of her insights on Shavuot. Cheryl? Cheryl?
Hi, can everybody see and hear me?
Okay. Yes.
I'm on. Can you hear me?
You're on.
Okay.
Yes.
So I just want to, I want to thank you, Bob, for tuning me into something that you sent me, because I feel that it speaks for me personally and my own feelings. So I'm happy to share this. I'm really going to speak in my own words. It won't be very long, but hopefully you all will understand and it'll be meaningful to you, to everybody. So in this article that I read, in 1935, the Spanish government wanted to make a celebration of the Rambam's 800th anniversary of his birth. And they were making plans, and Jews were excited, and then some other Jews weren't so excited. And the reason is because that, you know, and then they went to different Torah scholars, and the scholars suggested that, you know, Rambam, you know, we learn and we study for generations and generations, years and years, on a daily basis for some of us. And it's not really appropriate to memorialize him or think of him in the past, because he is really a very current presence in Jewish lives and in Jewish learning. You know, people are commemorated and memorialized by stamps and bridges and paintings and things like that. And Jews, we don't necessarily do that. He's not a historical relic because he lives in the present. So Jewish history is rich and important with all sorts of events, and the Torah is filled with remembrance of the past, and Torah is very much how we live life today. Okay, we're not to just read it like it's some ancient document and look at it once in a while and preserve it. It's something to be used every single day. It's a guidebook for the way we live, the way we deal with other people. A lot of things that the clip before me said kind of mentioned, so I'm going to kind of skip a few things. But it's a living document, and the Torah is a living thing, and it's how we live life today. We're instructed to do many things, to remember Pesach, the Exodus of Egypt, and we do that once a year, but we don't really do it once a year. When we do it once a year, we're actually reliving that experience. We're feeling that experience and how we relied on Hashem to protect us and take us out. And it's for freedom and how we combat tyranny. And there's all kinds of things that we remember. But we live it daily. Okay, and we live it daily by our prayers. I mean, it says everywhere in the Torah and in our davening, when we were taken out of Egypt, and that's mentioned in a variety of ways with a strong arm, and not just on Pesach. It's daily. So it reminds us of. It gives us messages of faith in God and the importance of freedom and, like I said, resistance of tyranny. So we dedicate that holiday to something greater than ourselves. And for me, I feel that we do that with all of our holidays. Jewish time is not linear, it's cyclical, and we see that. And the same thing goes for Shabbat. We celebrate it each week. We commemorate the creation of the world. We re-experience what it means that Hashem, that God is our creator, and that we owe him everything. These principles are applied to every event recorded in the Torah, and we are called to remember. We are not just remembering, we are reliving and reintegrating the experience and making them part of our daily lives, tangible and relevant in every way. When we say the Shema, this is just a personal side note. When we say the Shema, and I say it daily several times a day, and every time I say Shema Yisrael, the first verse, I imagine myself standing at the foot of Har Sinai, of Mount Sinai, and I kind of quiver and I tear because I almost feel like I was really there. And that is one of the ways in which I relive Torah and try to keep, Judaism alive in my life. But this, the festival of Shavuot is really, there's nothing like it that commemorates and helps us live the Torah. However, when the Torah tells us to, celebrate Shavuot, and it gives us the date, the 6th of Nisan, it doesn't say because we're doing it because of we received the Torah. Because if it said it's because we received the Torah, it makes it in the past. Just like in the Shema, when God says, on this day I command you, and it means, this day means today, not on that day, on today, this day. And Shavuot, celebrates it, in that way. We're not supposed to fixate on one day of receiving the Torah by remembering it as, something in the distant past. Our relationship with Torah is immediate and visceral. We incorporate it into our lives each and every day, as I keep saying. And the words of the Torah should always feel as new and as fresh to us as is the day that we received it, which we should receive it every day. It gives us our mission and our purpose, direction and guidance of how to live and why we live, what our ideals are. It's something of immediate relevance every moment, every single day. Shavuot is a celebration of freshness and renewal. It's a celebration of renewed inspiration, renewed challenge, and it's a celebration of Torah today. So for me, we must always search in Torah for our next, and for new knowledge and fresh inspiration. So it is a very sincere and heartfelt message that I really wanted to give you all, is that it's not the past, it's now, it's here. So
okay, thank you very much, Cheryl. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jenny.
Okay. Our second presenter is Nancy Rush. For her, the COVID lockdown is very real. I think she may be our only COVID survivor presenter. But as a COVID, it's important to know that as a COVID survivor, her response was not merely to sit back and talk about how the illness affected her, but was to immediately donate plasma so that she could pass her antibodies on to others. It's not really a surprise for anybody who knows Nancy, as well as I should say her husband, Jason. And because we know that while they're quiet, they are also firmly committed to growing Jewishly. And while now she is a real estate professional with Better Homes and Gardens, she was a preschool teacher at Temple Israel and actively involved in the Aisha Torah as a founder and leader of Aisha's own Chesed committee. So she and her husband, Jason, are quiet, but always encouraging and caring. So Nancy, the microphone is yours.
Okay, thank you, Bob. That was really nice. So Bob gave me an article that was from Chabad.org by Stacy Goldman. It was entitled "The Meaning in the Order, Understanding the Ten Commandments." So similar to the introduction that we had, it highlights the Ten Commandments. The author, Stacy, points out something right off the bat, saying how amazing it is that 10 simple utterances can provide the basis for an entire civilization. It applied then, and it applies to us today. Therefore, why we read through the 10 Commandments every year here at Shavuos. So the Talmud goes on further to explain that the first 5 commandments reflect our obligation to God, while the last 5 commandments instruct us regarding our relationship with other people. And the article goes on to explain that there's 10, in the 10 commandments, there are actually 3 categories that it could be separated into. There's the emotion, there's speech, and there's action. So, looking at the first two commandments, belief in God and not worshiping other gods, that falls into our motion. That is that's our heart. That's where we feel God's presence. The third commandment, not taking God's name in vain, that would fall in speech and us being guarded and careful with our speech. The fourth commandment, keeping Shabbos, that falls in the area of action. And, so these are progressively getting a little more difficult. Believing in God, not worshiping other gods, that could be quite easy perhaps, but then guarding our speech, that could make things more difficult. And then our action of keeping Shabbos maybe becomes even more difficult. The final on the left side, the fifth one, honoring our mother and father, it might occur like that is an emotional a section to the 10 Commandments. However, it's not to love our mother and father, which would be the emotion. It's really another action, which is our behavior. It's honoring. It's honoring our mother and father. And again, that might be difficult too in certain situations. So the author goes on to say that if we disrespect our biological creators, our parents, then we're in essence, disrespecting and dismissing our divine creator. So that is a bridge to the other side of the 10 Commandments, which is focusing on our fellow human beings. And so the first three, do not murder, no adultery, no stealing. I mean, again, those are a little bit on the easier side. I don't think we each have trouble with those areas. Those fall under action now. So they were kind of flipping the situation where it started off on the left side with emotion, speech leading to action. Well, now on the side with our fellow human beings, it starts off with the action, which is a little easier than the last two commandments. So commandment number 9, not to bear false witness. Now we're talking about speech again. And that gets a little more challenging for some people. It might be hard. We might transgress our speech. So we find ourselves having to battle that, perhaps. And then our final commandment, do not covet your neighbor. That might be one of the hardest things for us to contend with. And that is that lands in the emotional category. So, let me just have some notes here. Let me see, there was really, so there's the pattern. There's the pattern of the emotion flowing into the speech, into the action. On the side with our fellow human beings, it's the flip order. But another pattern that she points out that I thought was really interesting is that the challenge that we might have with, like, do not covet your neighbor, that the more that we can emotionally get invested in the first two commandments, our belief in God and not worshiping other gods, and the more that we can recognize that we have a relationship with our Creator and that we are created for a reason, and to tap into that, then we can take care and respect ourselves, and then therefore we can deepen and care our respect for others, so that we find ourselves not even feeling challenged about coveting our neighbor, because we have deepened our relationship so much with the Almighty, it translates into our relationship with others. So it was a really nice article. So thank you, Bob, for taking me outside my comfort zone.
You couldn't tell. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
So we're going to move on. I think, David, we've got another video. We've invited Rabbi Jonathan Sachs in our next segment, although not in person. He's an internationally known and former chief rabbi of the United Kingdom. David, do you mind go ahead and run the tape?
If you look at the Shlosh Regalim, the 3 pilgrimage festivals, you find something very remarkable. Specifically, if you look at the Megillah that we read on each. On Pesach, we read Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs. On Shavuot, we read Megillat Ruth, the Book of Ruth. And on Sukkot, we read Kohelet, the Book of Ecclesiastes. And the fascinating thing about those three Megillot is that they're all about love, but they're about different seasons of love. So Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs, is about love in the springtime, love when you're young. The whole book of Shir HaShirim is a duet between two lovers who are obsessed with one another. There's no mention in the whole book about marriage, children, setting up home, responsibilities to the future. All there is their passion for one another. Turn to Kohelet at the other extreme. Kohelet is about the autumn of the year, and it is about the autumn of life. The author of Kohelet is now an old man. Kohelet contains one of the most moving descriptions of old age in all of literature. And he's looking back and he's asking what really was worthwhile. And in the end, it wasn't all the houses he built or the possessions he accumulated. He says, Ra'ei chaim im isha asher ahavta, see life with the woman you love. This is love grown old, grown serene, but it's still love in the autumn. Between the two, though, at the threshold of summer, is the story of Ruth. Love as chesed, loving kindness, love as deed. And it is that chesed that, according to the sages, permeates the book from beginning to end. The chesed that Ruth had to her mother-in-law, whom she sees as bereaved and bereft, and returning alone to her people. And she says, no, you can't go alone, I will not leave you. And then Boaz, moved by this kindness he sees on the part of Ruth, and that moves him to extraordinary kindness of his own, taking her as his wife, caring for Naomi, and making sure that they will have a marriage, which will have children, which in the end, 4 generations down the line, has David HaMelech, the greatest of Israel's kings. This is love as loyalty. This is love as chesed. When Tyndale in 1535 sat down to write the first full English translation of the Hebrew Bible, he had to coin the new word loving kindness to translate that word chesed, which is the very essence of the book of Ruth. And it is that chesed that epitomizes the relationship of Israel and God that happened on Shavuot at Mount Sinai. What happened on that extraordinary moment when God made a covenant with a people was described by the prophet Hosea as an erusin, ve'erastichli. I betroth you to me forever. I betroth you to me in justice and righteousness and kindness and compassion. I betroth you to me in faith, and you will know the Lord. That is faith as marriage, love as loyalty. And that is what Shavuot is all about. In a world where religion is too often associated with extremism, with harshness, with prejudice, and with violence, we would do well to remember that essential message of Shavuot, epitomized in the book of Ruth, that at the heart of faith is that faithfulness that binds us to one another in the love that is loyalty, and the loyalty that is love. We need more of it today. Live it and experience it. Chag Sameach.
Oh my, you should really do this professionally. So our next speaker is David Porter. So reflecting the attributes that you would expect from a professional piano tuner, David Porter is a skilled listener who translates what he hears into what he does. I suspect most people don't know that he's also a committed bicyclist who built his own electric bicycle from parts. He's a guy who not only wants to know how stuff works, but incorporates that into his life. You can see that with his steady presence at New Sakari, as a regular Minyan goer and a regular on our Zoom broadcasts. Many of you may not know David, and I think you'll appreciate the opportunity to get to know him a little bit. David?
Thanks, Bob. After a build-up like that, I get to give a speech about humility. Okay, here we go. Yeah, Humility and Mount Sinai by Rabbi Shraga Simmons. The story is told of Navardok, the great 19th century European yeshiva, where the students were known for their great humility. To reach such levels, they would sit for 30 minutes each morning in the study hall, rocking back and forth, chanting the mantra, "I am nothing, I am nothing." One morning, a new student arrived at the yeshiva, and upon entering the study hall, was surprised to find hundreds of students muttering, "I am nothing." He checked the sign outside the door to make sure he had the right place, then figured he might as well join them. After finding an empty seat, he began rocking back and forth, chanting, "I am nothing, I am nothing." Suddenly, the student seated next to him turns and says, "The nerve of you! I was here an entire year before I was nothing." So, the Midrash says that when God was preparing to give the Torah, all the mountains stepped forward and declared why they thought the Torah should be given on them. "I am the highest mountain," said one. "No," said another, "I am the steepest mountain, and therefore the Torah should be given on me." One by one, they all stated their claims. In the end, God chose Mount Sinai, not because it was the tallest or the grandest. It's not, as anyone who's toured the Sinai desert will attest, but because, says the Midrash, it was the most humble. What is the notion of humility, and what does it have to do with Torah? First, let's clarify what humility is not. Humility does not mean a meek reluctance to speak up or be assertive. Humility is not slouching your shoulders and having a low self-esteem. The Torah refers to Moses as the most humble person who ever lived, yet he aggressively confronts Pharaoh, fights a war against Amalek, and stands up to castigate the Jewish people. Humility is to know one's place. In this week's Parsha, the Torah describes the arrangement of the 12 tribes in the Israelite camp. After a long description of who will travel first and who will travel last, the Torah says, the people did exactly as they were instructed. What's the big deal? That everyone camped where they were supposed to. The Midrash explains that when God suggested the arrangement, Moses feared that by specifying which tribe travels in the east and which in the west, who in front and who in back, disputes will break out between the tribes. So God tells Moses, years earlier at Jacob's funeral, his 12 sons carried the coffin. The way the sons were arranged around the coffin is the same way the tribes are to be arranged in the camp today. In this way, everyone is already clear as to his proper place. So don't worry, God tells Moses, because when someone knows their place, there is inevitably peace and calm. This applies to our own lives as well. Our circumstances of birth and our talents or lack thereof to a great degree determine our choices. The higher a person becomes spiritually, the more humble he becomes, internalizing the reality of our tenuous mortality and that only God is eternal. Moses was called the most humble because when he stood before God, he knew his place. Anything else precludes room for God to fit in. That's why the Talmud likens arrogance to idol worship. Both push away the presence of God. In the secular world, the biggest personalities are often the most arrogant. Picture the scene. A movie star walks into a party, strutting, cocky, head raised. His mannerisms shout, "I am great, and I don't need you or anybody else." The room is silent with awe. Charisma. Judaism says this is counterfeit charisma. True humility means living with the reality that nothing matters except doing the right thing. The humble person is not dependent on the opinion of others, because sometimes doing the right thing is popular and consistent with one's ego needs, and sometimes it's not. The humble person can set his ego aside to consistently do the right thing. An arrogant person, on the other hand, is less concerned about right and wrong and more concerned about himself. He may appear smooth on the outside while manipulating things around him to suit his self-centered needs. In actuality, it is humility which guarantees charisma. The humble person has the ability to rise above his self-centered narcissist envelope and embrace those around him. Since he confidently knows his place, he can leave space for others without having an ego crisis. He honors others and helps them find their place too. Judaism defines it like this: arrogance equals I'm all that counts. Humility equals what's greater than me is what counts. Unfortunately, humility has gotten a bad rap. Humility is not thinking less of yourself, it is thinking of yourself less. Humility is the ability to be objective about one's own position in relation to others. If I am in the position to lead, then I should lead. And if not, I should defer. I should know where I stand and not take undue liberties. If I am in the presence of someone more knowledgeable, I should think twice before speaking. There is nothing more annoying than an accountant standing in a room full of doctors and pontificating on medical science. How do we achieve humility? The first thing a Jew does upon awakening in the morning is to say the Moda Ani prayer. I acknowledge you, God, for graciously returning my soul for yet another day. Thank you. Step one of humility is to put our relationship with God into perspective. We feel the we rather than the self-indulgent negative energy. This makes us more relaxed, calm, and flexible, which trickles down to all our interpersonal relationships, business partnership, marriage, community, and nation building. Here are more tools for gaining humility. Read eulogies. They're a good dose of humility. They help us get perspective on the true meaning of life. Try to write your own obituary. For what do you want to be remembered? Use humility to rise above arguments. You don't have to respond to every insult. Ask a close friend to give you criticism. As we more clearly see our own faults, we are less likely to be arrogant towards others. A crucial step to humility is found in the opening verse of the book of Numbers. And God spoke to Moses in the Sinai desert. The sages ask a fundamental question. Why was the Torah given in a desert? Because a desert is empty. This means that to acquire Torah, to receive God's wisdom, one must first be willing to open up space inside. The Maharal of 16th century Prague explains that the only way to learn anything is to first ask a question. A question creates a lack and a need, a space that the answer can then come and fill. But without first a question, there is no room for the answer. The message of Shavuot, the holiday of reliving the Sinai experience, is to know our place, make some space, and let the truth of God and His Torah enter deep inside. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. Our next presenter is Jay Pepos. So Jay and his wife, Susan Feigenbaum, are less frequently front and center, but they're constantly behind the scenes without fanfare, but always supportive. Everyone knows how smart Jay is, internationally known in his field, but I expect we all know really smart people who are only that, smart. Jay is a lot more than that. He's highly principled with a clear head on right and wrong. He's insightful, and he's also funny. I've been lucky to see how principled and committed he is in stepping up and doing the right thing. For example, I expect that there are not a lot of people who know that that when Jay recognized that there are vision issues amongst first responders that were going unaddressed, he stepped forward to create and fund the 9/11 Vision Foundation that provides LASIK surgery for first responders in our area. These are tidbits that are less known because Jay's a quiet and humble man, or at least he was before I introduced him. So Jay, if you don't mind, go ahead and provide the next session.
Thank you, Bob, and thank you for arranging for this celebration of Susan and my 41st wedding anniversary today.
Very nice.
I'd like to. There's no one else I'd like to share it with than all of you. So it's great. So I'm going to see if I could I share a screen? Because when I was asked, I think you have to let me do it though.
That's up to David.
So what I was asked to talk about, and I appreciate the introduction. I was asked to talk about the differences in the way the 10 commandments or the 10 statements were presented in Exodus and in Deuteronomy. And let me see. David, could you let me share a screen? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah? Okay. I think the rabbi let you.
Okay.
Jay, I just made you co-host, so you should be able to do it.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
So it's easier to see it this way. So here is how the fourth and fifth and 10th commandments were expressed in Exodus and in Deuteronomy. So for example, for the fourth commandment, you could see that in Exodus, it talks about remember the Sabbath day. But when Moses repeated this, he said, keep the Sabbath day. And you could see that the explanation for the Sabbath in Exodus pertains to the 6 days that the Lord made the heaven and the earth and the sea and all that is in them, and he rested on the seventh day. Therefore, the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and sanctified it. Whereas in Deuteronomy, it's expanded a little bit in terms of who the Sabbath pertains to, and also it says that you shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and that the Lord your God took you out from there with a strong hand and with an outstretched arm, and therefore the Lord your God commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. So a different reason given in Deuteronomy than in Exodus, and there's also some differences in the fifth and 10th commandments as well. So I was asked to talk about that, and I looked into what's written, at least some of the things that have been written about it, and obviously, to remember is different than to keep. Verbally, in a sense, we sanctify the Sabbath. We remember by saying Kiddush, but we keep it by being Shomer Shabbos. So there's big differences. So what I found is basically, I found a lot of different things, but there's four main things that I'd like to talk about briefly. One interpretation is that the Talmud and the Midrash, they say that both remember and keep, those words were actually said simultaneously and were heard together, but they were recorded separately in Exodus and Deuteronomy. So that was one interpretation of that. Another interpretation was that on the first set of the tablets, the one that was destroyed after the sin of the golden calf, it said the first version, and on the second version was the second set on the tablets. Also, based on Midrashic tradition, is the feeling, is the concept that all the people in the world were offered the Torah. And so the first set of commandments about the Sabbath are universal, and it therefore credits creation is the reason for it. And perhaps that would have been the final version if all the world had accepted Torah. But since only the Jews accepted Torah, the second version is more personal to them. And so it cites the Exodus, which is obviously much more personal to Jews, and only they therefore are obligated to keep the Sabbath. And there's some writings that it's almost in return for our being released from slavery to being brought from slavery to freedom. And the last concept that I would discuss briefly is that another interpretation is that in Exodus, it's God's words being directly spoken. But in Deuteronomy, it's Moses' prophetic interpretation of God's words. And since we really are incapable of understanding the infinite, perhaps it's easier for us in some ways to understand it through Moses' mind and words. But both are important. The direct words of God, all of which we may not understand, as well as trying to understand and personalize the Torah to the best of our abilities. So I appreciate, Bob, you're calling all this to my attention, and it was very interesting to read about it.
Thank you very much, Jay, and happy anniversary.
Thank you.
Okay, I think you need to unshare.
Okay.
Okay, perfect. So we're going to take a brief video interlude. We're going to hear from Rebbitzin Lori Palatnik. Rebbitzin Palatnik is also internationally known, internationally sought after. Amongst other achievements, she's the ball of fire behind the Jewish Women's Renaissance Project. If you already know Rebbitzin Palatnik, I don't need to say any more. If you don't, I expect that after Shavuot, your YouTube use will gear up a little bit. So David, if you don't mind sharing what Rebbitzin Palatnik has to say about Shavuot.
Okay. Well, the great holiday is coming up. And you're thinking, wait a minute, which holiday is at this time of year? This is the big one, Shavuot, Shavuos. It's the holiday where we commemorate and we remember and we celebrate the receiving of the Torah. When the Jewish people were at Mount Sinai and we received that Torah. What's so great about it? It's just historic. We learned so much. I'm going to teach you one thing, one idea. Because sometimes we receive the Torah, a bunch of do's and don'ts, yikes. I was meeting with somebody the other day, and he told me that he was raised with no boundaries. That his parents, I guess, were free-spirited, and there were no boundaries. He's very entrepreneurial, and he created a company, and he said that he created a company with no boundaries. He said people could come in shorts and tank tops, or people could come in wearing suits. People could start at 8 and leave at 2, and people could start at 12 and leave at 6. No boundaries. He thought that this will be great. Everybody will be happy. And he said he realized everybody's not happy. And we're not so productive. So somebody suggested to him to write a manual. Write a manual for employees, an employee manual, where it was very clear, the hours, dress code, etc. So he said he did that. He had a manual made, and he distributed it, and he said he thought people would be like, what, you're telling me what to do? He said people were so much happier because now they knew where the lines were. Now they knew what was expected of them. Now there was a sense of consistency. Now it wasn't just a free-for-all. Now there were boundaries, and they were happier. And he said they also became more productive. So I explained to him that Shavuot is coming, and we remember that God gave us the Torah, And in the Torah, there were boundaries. Just like you created an employee manual, the Almighty put us into this world and gave us a manual. He said, this is how you're going to be the happiest. This is how you're going to be the most productive. This is going to bring out your potential. So when you're thinking about the do's and the don'ts and all the rules, remember my friend who created this company, and the boundaries made people happier, and it brought out the best in them. Have a good Yontif. I'm Lori, Almost Live.
Very nice.
Good, thank you. We've heard from members, many of whom have a relatively short history with New Zachary B'nai Zion. But as you know, New Zachary B'nai Zion has a very long history, and there are families that have had generations share in that history. One family is the Alper family, and I'm very happy that Karen Alper has agreed to make a presentation. Karen is a multi-generational member of New Zachary B'nai Zion. While a daughter of Lenny and Fran Alper, she easily stands on her own 2 feet as a professional medical writer, a blogger, and a regular at New Zachary B'nai Zion and other Jewish organizations, a leader at YP Ignite, active with our sisterhood. She shared the Master of Ceremonies job with Jesse Barash at our last annual dinner, and she's going to share with us some insights now. Go ahead, Karen.
Thank you very much, Bob. Okay, who here was present at Mount Sinai to witness the giving of the Torah?
All of us.
I think we all were. So one of the coolest things about Shavuot is that it commemorates how all of us, the entire group of Jewish people, were there to witness God giving the Torah, a national revelation. And something of this magnitude had never happened previously, and it's never happened again. No other religion has ever made a claim of this kind of national revelation like Judaism has. So it's a very unique and momentous experience. Now, the story of Mount Sinai is described in Exodus chapter 20, verse 15, and it says, "And all the people saw the thunder, and the torches, and the shofar sound, and the mountain smoking." So you can tell from this description that something pretty powerful is happening, but how is it that we could see the thunder and the shofar sounds? Normally, we can see lightning during a thunderstorm, and it's often followed by a crack of thunder, which we can hear, but thunder itself is invisible. So how is it that the Jews at Mount Sinai were able to see the thunder? There are 2 different explanations in the Midrash that talk about this. One is from Rabbi Akiva, who I have here, not Akiva Shtisel, but Rabbi Akiva, and one is from Rabbi Ishmael. So Rabbi Akiva, according to the Midrash, supports this line in the Torah by saying, they saw the audible and they heard the visible. Very interesting. But Rabbi Ishmael said, no, the Torah might say that they could hear thunder, or I'm sorry, that they could see thunder, but really they can only see the visible and hear the audible, which seems obvious because that's how it is, that's what we're used to. So what does this mean, and how can we see thunder, or can we? Is this possible? Rabbi Menachem Schneerson, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, offers the following interpretation of these 2 opposing explanations. So the first explanation of why we could see the audible at Mount Sinai is from Rabbi Akiva, and he explains that seeing represents the physical world. So as humans who are blessed with the gift of sight, we can see the world in terms of tangible things. Here's a coffee mug, here's a cell phone. It's very clear. This sense is very tangible, it's physical. But hearing, on the other hand, represents the spiritual world. And by using our ears, we can discuss ideas, we can imagine things more abstractly and gain a deeper understanding of our tangible world. So by seeing the audible, Rabbi Akiva's explanation is that the experience at Sinai took man out of his everyday physical realm and allowed him to experience the spiritual, where something we normally see was experienced at a more abstract and deeper level. Now, the second explanation that was by Rabbi Ishmael over here offered the opposite opinion. Remember, he's the one who said that we can only see the visible and hear the audible. So Rabbi Schneerson's commentary says that Rabbi Ishmael was not doubting man's potential for spirituality, but by acknowledging that we as humans can only see what's visible, we are only human after all. And so at Mount Sinai, God came down to meet man at his level. So in Rabbi Ishmael's view, instead of elevating ourselves spiritually at our experience at Sinai, we stayed where we were and accepted the divine into our physical world. So one Torah line, two different opinions, and today or tomorrow, as we celebrate God giving us the Torah at Mount Sinai, we can learn something from both Rabbis Akiva and Ishmael, that we as Jews should strive to elevate ourselves spiritually, but also accept the divine from above into our everyday lives. That's it.
Thank you very much, Karen. So our last presenter is Jesse Barash. In the several years that Jesse and his wife Debbie have become affiliated with our shul, they have both shared their enthusiasm and their warmth. You may recognize Jesse as the other co-MC at our annual dinner. And I think one of his hardest jobs there was to make sure that all of our speeches, especially Joni and mine, fit into the designated time slot. Jesse had the chore of telling us on more than one occasion to make our speeches shorter. Imagine the irony when Jesse called us this morning to say that his presentation was running a bit long. But that's okay, because I'm sure that whatever time Jesse runs over will be well spent by all of us. For him, giving more is natural. For example, you may not know that not only has Jesse been a regular at Minyan, but plenty of times at 7 o'clock in the morning, when he gets that last minute call to be number 10, he's right there. I'm not aware of him ever turning us down. That's the kind of guy he is, which helps explain why he's a presenter here tonight. Jesse?
Jesse, I'm looking to see where you're at so I can unmute you. So could you wave your hand? Does anybody see Jesse? I don't see him.
Yeah, let me find. Yeah, here he is.
Okay, I'm unmuted.
There you go.
All right, very good. All right, so my talk is based on the teachings of Rebbetzin Esther Pekarsky, a highly sought out international speaker from Israel who provides marital advice to both newlywed couples and those who have been married for many years. And by the way, I know Jay and Susan are at 41. We're a little ahead of you. Debbie and I will be celebrating 42 in August, I hope. While the 10 Commandments can and should be taken at face value, when we apply a bit of interpretation, we can find very practical and essential guidelines, which I like to call the 10 suggestions for a good marriage. The first commandment is, I am the Lord your God who took you out of Egypt. This first commandment establishes the foundation for the Jewish people to be certain that our Lord is God. And as married couples, we start out with a similar certainty, certain that our spouse is the right person for us. But people change and evolve, which may cause one to question that certainty. So the Rebbetzins' advice is to keep each other involved and apprised of the changes in order to reinforce that certainty rather than let our individual growth tear it down. The first commandment also states, who took you out of Egypt. This notion of where we came from also applies to our marriages. We all have history. We all have habits and baggage. It's important to let your partner know how these influences affect your perception and expectations. If you do this early and often, you can learn how to better deal with issues in your marriage as they arise. The second commandment is, Do not have other gods before me. In other words, don't compare. This is true for marriages. Men, don't look at other women. Don't compare your wife to another man's wife. Similarly, women, don't look at other men. Don't compare your husband to another woman's husband. The advice offered is to acknowledge and reinforce the good that is in your spouse. Remember, comparing only leads to trouble. The third commandment is do not say God's name in vain. For your marriages, this could be translated as don't speak about your spouse in a condescending way. Many couples have a tendency to put down their spouses in a laughing or joking way. But what good can this do? It actually only reflects badly on both you and your spouse. The fourth commandment is to remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. The first part of this commandment is remember. Remembering is a good thing. Create good memories for yourself and your family. Pull them out of your memory bank when things get tough. And much like we are commanded to focus on Shabbat by taking a day off, the suggestion is to make time for your marriage. Take a day off or an evening away, sometime with no cell phones, no computers, or other distractions. The fifth commandment is to honor your father and your mother. In your marriage, it is important to honor your parents and also your parents-in-law, especially once they reach an older age, which can often be challenging. In honoring your parents and your parents-in-law, a wife and husband reinforce their commitment to each other, thus strengthening their bond. The sixth commandment is, thou shalt not murder. This prohibition against murder means with your hands or with your tongue. Both physical abuse and verbal abuse are clearly forbidden. When you speak cruelly to someone, you kill his or her character, which is bad. But it's even worse if it's your spouse. Instead, seek to live in an environment of love, acceptance, and support, which can build up a person's self-esteem. The seventh commandment is, thou shalt not commit adultery, which can be interpreted in the positive as simply be faithful. Being faithful means recognizing that there are areas of marriage that are private. It means that we don't reveal our personal issues to the public. It means that both a man and woman should respect the private space and time within marriage as sacred. Finally, it means trust. The eighth commandment is, thou shalt not steal. Taking undeserved credit is just like stealing. Instead, where possible, give credit, especially to your spouse for those things that she or he has done to allow you to be the person you are. The ninth commandment is, do not bear false witness, which can be positioned in the positive as be truthful. In other words, have honest and open communication in marriage. Unfortunately, we don't receive the gift of becoming a mind reader under the marriage canopy. Some women mistakenly think, if my husband really loved me, he would know what is bothering me. That's not true. It is critical that you tell him simply and politely. And guys, this applies to husbands too. I'd argue even more so. Finally, the 10th commandment, thou shalt not covet, or said differently, don't be jealous. While this is often thought about as being jealous of other people and the things they have, the focus here is to not be jealous in one's marriage. A husband should not be jealous of his wife and vice versa. Instead, recognize that as a couple, you are a unit stronger than the sum of two individuals. Try hard to express appreciation of your partner rather than being jealous. In summary, the 10 Commandments applies to all aspects of our lives. And hopefully now we can easily recognize how these commandments can form the 10 suggestions for a good marriage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jesse. I want to take the opportunity to thank each and every one of the we need to mute. I want to take the opportunity to thank each and every one of the presenters. I have to tell you, it is clear that each and every one of them poured their soul into this, and it really exceeded my expectations about what they were going to do. I'd like to end on a musical note. You'll notice that the selection is not a Shavuot selection per se. There are not a lot out there in the world on Shavuot music. The Maccabees song, the Book of Good Life, is really aimed at Rosh Hashanah. But it's the book that we received on Shavuot, gives us the lessons and instructions for how to get into the Book of a Good Life. The next major holiday we celebrate as Jews is Rosh Hashanah. And I'm hoping that as we see this video, we can see that how we can draw on the insights that have been shared with us tonight and our book to get us more confidently to that night in September when we look to be inscribed in the Book of a Good Life. So David, do you mind running the last video?
Sensitivity to others will increase. Hopefully, we'll open our eyes and think more consciously. 'Cause hopefully, we'll go from where we are to where we want to go. Shavuot to everyone.
Okay, we can unmute everyone. I want to wish everyone a good
Let
Yontif.
us get on video, just that I look terrible.
We can unmute everyone, right? How do you? I don't know how to do that, David. And I want to wish everybody a good Yontif and a good Shavuot.
Yontif.
Good Yontif.
Good Yontif.
Yontif, everyone.
Have a good one.
Good Yontif, everybody.
Good Yontif to you too.
Thanks, everybody.
You did a great job.
Good job. Everybody did a great job.
Thank you. It was wonderful and inspiring. Good Yontif, everybody.
Oh, there's Abby, my daughter.
Jesse's too.
Oh, there's Abs.
There's Abby.
There's Abby. Hi, Abs. Hi.
Hi, Mom.
Hi, Abs. How you doing?
Abby,
I miss you.
You miss me? Weird.
I do. Oh.
Good job, Dad.
Thanks, sweetie. Bye, bye, everybody.
Bye. Yontif. Have a good Shavuos.
That the wrong thing to say.
Turn off.
Shavuot Tov and
Shavuos Tov.
Shavuos Tov and Shabbat Shalom.
Good job,
David.
Way to go, David.
Okay, it was
Nice
great.
job, guys. You
Way to
did
go,
great.
David.
Woo!
It was terrific.
I need another shower now. Thank you so much.
That was great.
Okay, good. I hope people enjoyed it.
I'm sure they did. I'm sure they did. It was very nice.
I think people really. I was really impressed with how seriously all the presenters took it. I really. I wasn't expecting them to go into as much detail. When we talked originally, it was how long do we need to talk, and I said, 3 to 5 minutes, and it was almost without exception. Everyone, there was no one who took a short circuit. Yeah. So okay.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, Dave. Next year you'll be giving the Devar Torah.
Okay.
You're great.
Okay.
Thank you very much. And thanks for letting me participate.
Okay.
I'll see you guys later. Take care.
Okay, very nice. Okay, thanks everyone. Bye-bye.